Aye. And against, carried. So the next item is the 8.4, measures that contribute to transport emissions reduction program, so pathway. So you would have seen yesterday I sent out some Chair's Recs, which I'm going to move and Morris is going to second. Look, I think it's well known what the views are on this and why we're going through this, so I'll just ask Phil to make a few comments.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's a slightly unusual step for me to speak at the front of an item, but I did want to make a couple of comments before you get into the substance of this. I need to acknowledge that quite some time ago, the exact month escapes me, but it was quite a while ago, there was a resolution passed requiring us to look at this and report on this, specifically what Auckland Council and Auckland Transport believe are realistic measures they can implement associated with emissions targets, how they're delivered and how they're funded. So that's kind of context. So what I wanted to do was acknowledge that there's been a very lengthy period of time between that resolution being passed and now, an undue delay, and to apologise to the Chamber for that. Today, only partially, to a limited degree, meets your expectations in passing that resolution, and that's why there's a Chair's Rec to bring this back in July. And leading to the final thing I wanted to say, which is, and without going into all of the wider discussion about TERP and climate change, climate emissions reductions and so on, just commit on behalf of the organisation to bring it back in July, and all with a view to getting ready for an informed discussion through the long-term plan process, which is really the time frame for you to contemplate how much are we investing in this area, what therefore should we expect in terms of measurable progress, and how do we understand TERP itself in terms of the balance between it being, if you like, sort of aspirational and a pathway as it's framed, versus a cold hard plan that you can and should expect measurable progress on in proportion to the investment that you make through the LTP. So sorry for the delay, apologies for that, and there's a commitment to get it back on track. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, thank you, Phil, and I just want to acknowledge, your counsel and your wisdom as we've discussed this and as of last week. So, look, are there any questions in regards to this? No. So, any discussion? Okay, Morris.
I'm going to be very careful here because I've got written notes. I do not want to stray, or my emotions might make me say some things that I shouldn't. The resolution was passed over a year ago, Phil, on the 8th of May last year, and it did actually ask us to get Auckland Transport to report back to us just simply what you said. What were realistic things we could do about emissions? How would they be implemented? How would they be delivered? How would they be funded and so on? It wasn't anything to do with a policy change. It was just what AT thought we could do. That's all I phrased it as, not to do anything. I accept it's a long-term plan issue where we will have to trade off against all sorts of other priorities for funding. What I couldn't understand is the moment that it got moved and seconded, officials behind you, in the video you can watch, went into a tailspin. I didn't understand why. They just went round and round, and we had two. If you go and look at the minutes of the meeting, we had two adjournments while we tried to accommodate what officials wanted. And we ended up adding only 4 words to the original resolution, and Auckland Council be added. In other words, it was only AT, but officials finally pushed after several other attempts at amendments and didn't get them. They finally got the one amendment was that they got included into it. So that's how it started. When I went to AT meeting the following week. I've got the date here. I think it was the 19th of May. Dean Kimpton said to me, well, we're all ready to go. We've got a big list of things we think are doable, achievable, we can fund them, or we can get a fast sort of support from the government on them and so on. Our problem is that officials at Auckland Council do not want us to proceed. That's what Dean Kimpton said, and I checked with him again. It was at the Auckland Transport Board meeting, so it's recorded. And what happened from that time on? This disappeared completely from the radar. And I believe that a resolution that is passed unanimously at this, whether you like it or not, you obviously voted for it at the time, it does not deserve to have radio silence and disappear from the screen. So I've tried to resurrect it a few times. I've raised it with you, Phil. I've raised it with you, Barry. I've raised it with you, Chair. And so far, it's been just the most egregious process of trying to get some response. I got told by both the chairman and by Barry this was already in the forward work program, and I felt embarrassed because I'd looked at the forward work program every month and hadn't seen it there. Turns out it's not. We were all misled here at this meeting when you're told it was in the forward work program, and it wasn't. And I've now got admissions to that. And all I can tell you is that if I hadn't been re-elected at the last October election, this would have disappeared into the ether and never been seen again. Because that's where it stayed. It wasn't reported to anybody. It wasn't recorded by anybody. It wasn't in the matters arising. It was just gone. So I finally got it to be brought back here. And the first excuse I've had from officials here at Auckland Council is, oh, well, look, we're so busy with the transition, we haven't got time to do this. They wouldn't have even been in this debate had they not inserted themselves. This was for Auckland Transport long before the legislation had even been introduced to Parliament, to give us a feeling for what we could do. Because what's currently in TERP, I'm sorry to say, you have got to have been smoking something really good if you believe any of it's got validity. A 550% increase in public transport use. You cannot be serious. A 50% reduction in vehicle kilometres travelled, private vehicle, by 3 years from now. A 50% reduction in vehicle. So we've got to get rid of the old TERP. And why? Because on a number of occasions at the Board of Auckland Transport, when I put up proposals, I've had them immediately say, sorry, councillor, that can't be done because it's not in compliance with our obligations under TERP. And so I want to get a realistic set of emissions that we can all sign up to, and we can balance them off against all of the other priorities that we have in a long-term plan. Because it may be they're more important than some other things, and it may be that they're not. I thought that the actual request I made was a very good first step in that direction. We would get from AT what they thought was doable. We could then use that as a debate to begin informing ourselves for it. Mr. Chief Executive, can I tell you that I just cannot believe we run a process where things can disappear, and no matter how many times a councillor raises it with various people, it just still stays in complete oblivion. And I just determined I was not going to let this pass. I was not going to let it stay in oblivion, and I was going to make sure it was brought back to, and finally we got it. And a final question to you, sir. Be very careful how you answer it. Are you aware of any other such resolutions that have been passed by any of the committee of the whole bodies that have never, ever been picked up after the resolution was passed? I want you to think about that very closely because I've done some research in this area. I'll leave it at that.
And we're in debate, so you don't need to answer that right away. Phil, is there any comment, any further discussion on this? Ken?
Thank you. It's just made me think of something to do with the budget, because we're all struggling to try to work out how we're going to find savings, etc. I know this is not questions, but I certainly have a question in my head about the vehicle kilometres travelled reduction pathway. We were told last term that that was $20 billion to implement, with all the things we'd need to do to make it happen. I'll be looking forward to information on how that unfunded policy sitting in the background, which staff do have to consider even though it's unfunded, how that works into our budgets and our requirements going forward. So I remember at the time being told it was unfunded, but then only 2 weeks later, I saw it referenced in other documents, and that was because I was told that although it's unfunded, at the bottom it said that the staff have to consider this in all their operational decisions going forward, which then does drag in cost. So I'll be looking forward to investigating that as somewhere we can find savings. Thanks.
Thank you. And just to remind people, we're talking about what's on the screen, and so we don't want to get bogged down into talking about stuff that will be coming in July. So, Daniel?
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think that the approach that's been recommended here by you and by Councillor Williamson is a helpful way forward. I think that the initial report that required the so-called embedding of this policy framework, which I don't think is particularly well quantified in the initial scope of the design of the TERP, made it quite difficult for the council officers to actually report back on a way forward for implementation. So whilst it may well be the case that the information hasn't been well reflected in a timely way, and others can have their own view about that, I think that, to be perfectly frank, requiring what looks like a rather unfunded mandate to be embedded in all sort of planning and transport investment decisions in perpetuity, or certainly to give effect to a 64% reduction in transport emissions, it's quite a challenge for the Chief Executive and the officers to be able to deliver something that you can quantify in an easily and digestible way. I look forward to the advice being received, because I actually do think that there are probably some quite useful things that can be done which would contribute to the reduction in emissions, possibly some quite low cost interventions that could take place, and I think that will be helpful and informative and hopefully move this debate forward. But thank you to you, Chair, and to Councillor Williamson, but also acknowledging the fact that the Chief Executive and the officers clearly do take responsibility for this and will hopefully move us forward in a constructive way.
Thank you. Julie?
Kia ora. I'm playing catch up a bit on this one. I've been sick for the last week, and I would have liked to have asked some questions, but I missed my opportunity there, and that's on me. I guess I feel a bit like I'm quite confused as to why, and I know you explained this in your email, Andy, why we would reject rather than withdraw the report, and I feel uncomfortable about the message that a rejection sends. I think that, and what I've heard from the speakers so far is how can I put this? A skepticism about whether the transport emissions reduction pathway, remembering what TERP stands for, as it was passed back some time ago, some skepticism about whether that document itself, that pathway itself, is worthwhile. And I worry that a reject vote today may be interpreted by some as a rejection of TERP, when I know that's not the intention and I know that's not the wording. But I'm just conscious of that, and so I'm weighing up. Sorry, I've got a teenager in the background making their lunch in a noisy fashion. I'm just weighing up whether I can vote for A, knowing how it may be misinterpreted and misrepresented. And I want to bring us back to the fact that the work that TERP outlines in transport emissions is one of the biggest challenges our city faces, right? The biggest lever we can pull on climate action, which we need to do as a city, is to reduce our transport emissions. This is not easy stuff. This document is aspirational, and it will need to change and evolve. And I'm not against that. I'm not against getting measures and that kind of stuff. So I support B. But I think I do want to acknowledge that at the heart of our transport emissions reductions pathway are concepts that potentially quite radically change the way our city works. And there is a difficulty, and I would have asked staff about this if I'd pushed the button fast enough. There is a difficulty asking staff to give us information about that is useful and thought through, while they are also in a process of radical change of the governance of transport for this city. And so I have some sympathy for them there. I can see why that's been difficult. I guess I would ask, and obviously, this is rhetorical. I would ask that we actually remember that we have a couple of other tools in our toolbox here, other than just getting an agenda report on this, that could be used in the interim while work is underway. And I understand the frustration that something was passed in May, I think you said last year, Morris, and hadn't yet been reported back. I shared that frustration over the issue of level crossings, for example, where we repeatedly asked for information and workshops and stuff, and it kept getting pushed off and pushed off. And eventually we got there, and now it is in train, if you'll excuse the pun. But I would just note that in the meantime, while we wait for that stuff, it doesn't have to be radio silence. And that's where I think this committee could usefully have had and could continue to have some workshops, some briefings, some other sessions. If an agenda report that goes into the level of detail requested is difficult to do, we have other tools in the toolbox. And I'm going to leave it there, but I just want to signal, Chair, I'm uncomfortable with rejection, because I fear that people will miss out the words between reject and the transport emissions reduction pathway that clearly indicate this is just about the report. And I do not support rejecting the emissions reduction pathway. It is absolutely essential for our city. Kia ora.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any discussion? None. I didn't withdraw it because there was a clear resolution. There were a number of conversations that were held in between times, 2 months out, saying this needs to be a good report, and so I didn't withdraw it because we didn't get paragraph 7 in the report itself was a tipping point. So there's been no further discussion. Yes, Richard.
I won't go into it because I think the debate will be when it comes back. But I just want to point out the resolutions from 2021 and 2022 were also not followed up on, and my frustration has come out every year on this, around renewals, around people's willingness to change based on if we invest. The ask for Auckland Transport, the TERP actually came from Auckland Transport and the RLTP in 2021 when they sat here a number of times, and I remember Councillor Henderson, a bunch of other people going, what is the emissions on this? What more can we do? How can we change? What will it be? And we keep saying, oh, that'll be done through an emissions reduction plan aligned with the government's emissions reduction plan, which is aligned with the Paris Agreement, and kept going round in circles. So then eventually we said, well, should we do one? And it was actually Auckland Transport who passed, they did it in a partnership with Auckland Council, and Auckland Transport actually approved the transport emissions reduction pathway before we did. They approved it, and then we approved it, and it was overwhelmingly supported in 2021 and 2022. And I guess I'm disappointed that what hopefully will come out in July will show that many of the things we asked for, even if it was just advice, it was advice, but could we zip? For 6 years I've been asking if we could zip the renewals budget with some of the new capital program, because we get a massive roading renewal, and then 3 years later we go, oh shoot, we should have put a bus lane in there, and then you rip up half the curb, and that's happened a number of times on the North Shore where a program of work comes in after a renewal and the whole community goes, why did you rip it up and not do it at the same time? There was a bunch of information of where we should invest, could invest, and that didn't come. So hopefully in July, some of that is shaken out, because I think, yes, we were thinking of emissions, yes, we were trying to attach it to what is the unfunded Paris Agreement, much like the unfunded ROMS program. There are a lot of things that are aspirational and a direction that you fund parts of, or you fund programs, or you fund projects. But I've been disappointed that a lot of the things we asked for and supported over 2 terms haven't come back. And I guess with Auckland Transport coming in, we will be in charge of some of that. But I didn't necessarily think the report was not saying some of that, but I would like some more advice and understanding on what that is. Because look where we've ended up, that we are, where we've followed our progress, which was through the Qatar, through the frequent bus network, through the electrifying of our bus fleet, we are saving a lot of money on diesel. We're spending over $1 million extra a week as a council family because of the diesel increase, but that is buffered by some of the work that the TERP help push for. So, you know, if you don't want to look at it from an emissions standpoint, look at it as a cost reduction plan, which our council vehicle fleet and also the bus fleet are making huge savings for us from a money point of view. And if we had been able to push forward with some of that, and the government hadn't cut back on a bunch of the investments that were originally promised to us, then maybe we would have made some more gains in that space. So I'm interested to see what comes back in July. I do feel uncomfortable just with I've never seen a reject before, so I'm not sure I'll support reject. I think we could have accepted the report and asked for further information, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, no further commentary. We'll put it, those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.
Can I just be noted against on A, thanks.